Good evening. Tonight's Committee of Adjustment hearing is being held by video conference and live streaming video on town's live stream webpage at oakville.ca. This is a hearing to consider applications for minor variance and consents held under the authority of the Planning Act. Please keep in mind the intent of this process is to review the applications that are before us, listen to the evidence, and then make a decision. This process is not intended to be used to resolve any concerns or disputes that may exist between the town, individuals, or organizations. If a request for deferral is made and the committee grants such a request, the applicant and authorized agent must contact the Secretary Treasurer to schedule a new hearing date. In order to conduct an effective and efficient hearing, we have adopted the following process. If you are watching the live stream of this hearing on oakville.ca and you wish to speak to an item on the agenda, please call 905-815-6095. Again, that's 905-815-6095. The phone number will be posted on the screen below the live stream page at oakville.ca. Staff will be standing by to take your call and provide you with further instructions to join the video conference. You will be asked to provide your name and number, an item that you wish to address. Further instructions will then be provided. The applicant or agent will be given an opportunity to briefly explain to the committee the basis of the application, answer any questions that may arise. A maximum of 5 minutes will be provided for each presentation. You will need to state your full name and address for the record, and any submissions beyond the 5 minutes will be at the discretion of the committee. All delegations must state their full name and address for the record, and a maximum of 5 minutes will be provided for their presentation. All remarks and questions are to be directed to the chair, and any submissions beyond the 5 minutes will be at the discretion of the committee. The applicant or agent will then be provided with a further 5 minutes to respond to the comments made by any interested parties and answer any questions that the committee members. If the applicant or agent has any concerns found in staff report, particularly with any proposed conditions, this will be the opportunity to advise us. The matter will then be taken into committee for a decision, and they will mark the end of all discussions. Any person desiring a notice of the decision for an application must provide a written request, preferably through email, to the Secretary Treasurer. Only applicants, specified persons, and public bodies may appeal decisions in respect of applications for minor variance and consents held under the authority of the Planning Act to the Ontario Land Tribunal. A notice of appeal may not be filed by any other individual, person, or unincorporated association or group. Written notice of the committee's decision will be mailed no later than 10 days for minor variance and 15 days for consents to the applicant and agent or any other person who has filed a written request for such a notice. If you do not agree with the committee's decision, the applicant, specified persons, or public bodies may appeal this to the Ontario Land Tribunal. The last day to appeal the decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal will be noted on the decision. If no appeal is received within the prescribed time frame, the decision of the committee becomes final and binding, and the Secretary Treasurer will then notify the applicant and anyone who has received a copy of the decision through written correspondence. People participating in this hearing are to be courteous to and respectful of the members of the committee, town staff, and any other person participating in the electronic hearing. Tonight's electronic hearing is being video recorded and available for future viewing at oakville.ca. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Happy New Year. We have one regret this evening, Mr. Ian Flemington. Do I have any declaration of pecuniary interests? Okay. Requests for deferral or withdrawal of applications at this time. Please raise your hand if you would like to request a deferral or withdrawal of an application, and the Secretary Treasurer will invite you.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now, Mr. Hicks. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, members, and Happy New Year. Application CAB A173-2022. This has been deferred once. We got a note from planning where they're having problem with one of the variances. We think we found a solution for that. We think we found a solution for the neighbors concerned as well. And it appeared as if there was a mistake made and there was a late and breaking variance that was missed. So we're going to request a deferral and hopefully come back with full support of everybody for that, but I hate to do it a second time, but I don't think there's any choice. I was going to try and present some modifications to the members, but I know you'd prefer not to see those on the floor at the time of the hearing. So
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Hicks. And you'll be sure to reach out to Glenn and Caroline Busby. I guess those are the, okay, very well.
So, yeah.
Members, I'm in your hands. All those in support of a deferral. Okay, your application has been deferred. You'll see the Secretary Treasurer for the next available hearing date.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
You're welcome. Good evening. Anyone else, Madam Secretary Treasurer?
Yes, we do have a Mr. Darren Signer. I'm just promoting him to panelist. Madam Chair, if you can bear with me, I do have a difficulties to promote him to panelist, but I'm trying.
That's okay. Go ahead. It's fine.
Good evening. My apologies for that. I didn't see the sign come up on my computer.
Good evening, Mr. Smith. Go ahead. Which application are you here for?
We're here for 402 Bonnie Meadow Crescent. My apologies. We are requesting a deferral as we have identified a few other additional variances that we require for front yard and rear yard. We also have to deal with the region on a possible exemption for an EIA assessment. So we were requesting the township for a deferral for us to deal with these additional issues and get back to them shortly.
Okay, very well. Thank you. All those in support of a deferral. Application has been, Mr. Hardcastle, are you with us? You're in support of the deferral as well? Okay, so the application has been deferred and you'll see the Secretary Treasurer at your earliest convenience.
Thank you very much.
Okay, anyone else, Madam Secretary Treasurer?
I don't see anybody that they raised a hand to request deferral.
Okay, we'll take the first item on our agenda then. B2212, consent for 492 Lakeshore Road. This is a relocation after the relocation of the Heritage House. They're looking at 2 parcels of land. We have Mr. Paul Demchek as the agent.
Good evening, members of the committee.
Good evening, Mr. Demchek. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I have prepared a brief presentation for this evening's agenda.
Staff will put that up. Go
Thank
ahead.
Thank you. Again, my name is Paul Demchek with Batori Management. I'm the planning consultant on behalf of the applicant for 492 Lakeshore Road East in Oakville. Next slide, please. So the subject site measures approximately 1,950 square meters. It's a corner lot with 42.6 meters of frontage along Lakeshore Road East and 45.95 meters of frontage on Park Avenue. A two-story detached dwelling and detached garage is currently located on the subject site, and the existing dwelling on the site is currently listed on the Municipal Heritage Register as a non-designated property. The purpose of the application this evening is to sever the property to create one new residential lot and one retained lot with frontages on Park Avenue. The landowner further seeks to construct a new detached dwelling on the retained lot and relocate the existing dwelling to the separate lot. I will note that my client has commissioned a heritage consultant, which is recommending that the town provide additional heritage protection through a Part 4 designation to the building. And further, we have been working with Oakville Heritage staff and presented the application in front of the Oakville Heritage Committee in November of last year. Next slide, please. So the applicant intends to relocate the existing heritage dwelling proposed on Part 2, which includes a two-story addition to the heritage dwelling. And a new two-story dwelling is proposed for Part 3. Part 1 that's noted on the draft plan before you is intended for a road widening and site triangle adjacent to Lakeshore Road East. The proposed development will require a minor variance application, which is before the committee this evening, to allow for the relocation of the existing heritage dwelling on the existing lot. I will note that once the dwelling is relocated on the property and the consent is completed, the current front yard condition will subsequently be defined as the flankage side yard, which will comply with the provisions of the zoning bylaw. And I will further explain that later in my presentation. Next slide, please. Oh, next slide, please. So this is a streetscape image that's been prepared by the project architect. You see the relocated heritage dwelling on the far left, and then the proposed new dwelling in the middle. So the general intent of the built form proposed dwellings is to comply with the existing built form setbacks that prevail within the immediate neighborhood, including front, side yard setbacks, as well as the height and massing that's typical in this neighborhood. The site obviously is in edge condition within the existing neighborhood and does present an opportunity for a modest infill while respecting the existing character of the neighborhood. Next slide, please. So the proposed development, the official plan designation on the property is low density residential. The site obviously and the proposed development has been evaluated based on the criteria of the official plan policies, including specifically policies 1119 of the official plan. Next slide, please. From a zoning perspective, the site is an RL3 Suffolk zone within the town of Oakville zoning bylaw. And I will note that the development, again, post severance, both lots fully comply with all provisions of the bylaw. Next slide, please. These are just, again, the RL3, for some of the RL3 provisions within the zoning bylaw. The proposed lots, again, fully comply with the requirements of the bylaw. And then again, post severance, the applications meet all the provisions of the zoning designation. Next slide, please. I'd like to just, before I get into the variances, I'd like to just highlight some comments just on the consent. So the proposed development meets the criteria, again, outlined in policy 1119 of the official plan. Again, it complies with the built form parameters of the zoning bylaw and does carefully consider the heritage dwelling on the property, which is, again, to be relocated on the property. The built form of both lots includes a scale, height, massing, and architectural character that is compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. The proposed development meets the RL3 Suffolk zone criteria, including all setbacks, orientation, and separation distances within the bylaw, but are also found within the neighborhood. And again, the proposed dwelling and relocated heritage dwelling are in compliance with the bylaw provisions and do fit in the context of the immediate neighborhood. I will note that the existing tree canopy, both within the public realm and adjacent lands, are maintained through the proposed development. And again, the proposed development is compatible with the predominant lot pattern, lot width, and lot depth of adjacent properties, which is also demonstrated in the planning justification report that was submitted before the committee this evening. Further, the proposed land division will not restrict development of adjacent lands. The development is appropriate to the use proposed and is compatible with adjacent lots. And again, the land division will comply with all requirements of the bylaw once the heritage dwelling is relocated on the subject site. In terms of the interim condition that is before the committee this evening on the screen right now, there are 3 variances that are proposed. 1 to the front yard setback, a second variance to the projection of uncovered stairs, and third, a window well encroachment variance. Again, in terms of the front yard setback, the intent of this provision is to ensure a consistent setback of buildings to the street line and accommodate, generally speaking, landscaping and parking requirements. In this case, given the orientation of the relocated dwelling and the intended consent application, the front of the dwelling is facing Park Avenue, and vehicular access is also provided from Park Avenue. Further, once the dwelling is relocated on the property, the current front yard condition will subsequently be defined as the flankage side yard, which will comply with the provisions of the bylaw and is also a common condition found on other corner lots adjacent to Lakeshore Road East within this neighborhood context. In terms of the projection of access stairs and the window well encroachment, the intent of both of these provisions is to ensure there are no negative impacts on grading and drainage adjacent to properties, as well as ensure there's adequate access on a given minimum side yard or yard setback. The proposed uncovered access stair protection and window well encroachments are located on the northern and eastern side of the dwelling, being the new flankage and rear yard of the dwelling, which again is a temporary condition to allow for the relocation of the heritage dwelling to occur on the site. While these are respective front and side yards on the current property, again, it is noted that once the consent application is complete, the uncovered access stair projection and window well encroachments will be in conformity with the zoning bylaw, as they will be within the flankage and rear yard of the proposed Part 2 lands. Next slide, please. This is the site plan showing obviously the full intended build out of both lots. So the proposed development, in my opinion, does represent a form that's compatible with the character of the existing low-rise residential context. It represents appropriate gradual growth and change within the residential area. And the proposed dwellings are consistent with the surrounding context pursuant to the policies of the Livable Oakville official plan and design guidelines for stable residential communities. It is my opinion the proposed variances are consistent with the general intent and purpose of the official plan. Zoning bylaws are minor in nature and are desirable development for the area and do represent good planning. Next slide, please. I've just shared a rendering on this image, just showing what was submitted before the committee for a rendering for both properties. I will note there was in the last few days, there was a number of comments and letters of objection that were received from residents. Some of the highlighted points that I did note was a concern about a loss of trees, a concern about negative impacts to the streetscape and character of the neighborhood. There was a concern about traffic and sight lines, as well as a concern about the front yard setback. Just in terms of the concern regarding loss of trees, again, all municipal-owned trees within the right-of-way are being maintained at the proposed development, as well as obviously all border trees through the proposed application. In terms of streetscape and character, so yes, this lot is one of the obviously larger lots within the immediate context. Within also the RL3 Suffolk zone, the character and streetscape is changing, in my opinion, in a way that is respective and still very compatible with the neighborhood. The lots, again, fully comply with the provisions of the zoning bylaw and have been carefully considered in terms of architectural design and details. In terms of traffic and sight lines, when we made our applications, we've obviously located the driveways, and specifically the driveway on the further northern lot as far south as physically possible. The driveway is further enough away from the distance of the intersection to meet both requirements of the zoning bylaw. And I'll further note there's been no comments from transportation staff at the town of Oakville or any concerns related to that proposed access. And finally, the concern regarding the front yard setback. So again, the proposed front yard setback is a temporary condition on the property. And once the dwelling is relocated and the new lot lines are finalized, the front yard setback is reoriented along Park Avenue, and again, will fully comply with the provisions of the zoning bylaw. I don't have any other comments. I'm happy to answer any questions before the committee this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Demchek. I will note that there are 11 letters of objection, and I will read the names of the individuals who've related their objections to record. Arena Bast, Windsor McDonald, John Taminsik, Corey and Rena Bast already. Elizabeth and Elliot Goldspink, Alison Elliott, Duncan Smith, Shirley Johnson, Lisa and Mike Schnur, Cheng Mack, and Rita and Frank Peters. Madam Secretary Treasurer, if there's anyone in attendance who'd like to speak to this application and has raised their hand, please let us know.
To Madam Chair, I have a couple of people that I'm promoting now.
Good evening, Mr. McDonald, go ahead.
I just have a question regarding the lakeshore sight lines on this. It looks like this house is moving very close to Lakeshore Road. Relative to its neighbors and the rest of the block, it seems to be much closer to that road than the other ones. And I'd just like the planner to comment on how that looks.
Okay, very well. Mr. Terminzik, do you have any questions for the planner?
I don't have any specific questions, but I did have a couple points I would like to make, and I was hoping to have a couple minutes to pass those along. And
Absolutely, you have 5. Go ahead.
okay, so my wife, Jillian Cousin, our children, and myself live next door to the property at 500 Lakeshore Road East. I'm a real estate lawyer with a practice downtown, and I drive by the home every single day along Lakeshore, as do many other Oakville citizens. I also own the old radial train station downtown Oakville, and I'm familiar with owning a heritage property and the nuances involved in improving and developing them. As with many other heritage buildings in the neighborhood, a lot of the charm and appeal comes from the sprawling grounds and setbacks that add to the visual appeal of the homes and that were common when these homes were built. I grew up as a young child in Glen Abbey and have lived in other neighborhoods in Oakville. And in my view, these types of homes are one of the elements that distinguishes our neighborhood from many others in Oakville. As per the letter of objection that we submitted, our objection relates to the front yard setback being proposed. We believe that reducing the front yard minimum by 13.13 meters, which represents a 67% reduction and would be 1 meter less than the 7.5 meters that zoning allows in the RL3 parent zone from the current setback, would be bringing the home far too close to Lakeshore and would be inconsistent with the streetscape in the neighborhood. Our home is 22.48 meters back from Lakeshore, and the remaining 3 homes on the block that are east of us are at least 9.51 meters back. My survey shows that the neighbor directly east of me is 9.51, and the others are in line with her. So that is what that's based on. As well, other corner lots in the neighborhood where frontage is not on Lakeshore and where houses are relatively close to Lakeshore appear to be set back further, such as at Raymar in Lakeshore, or the southwest corner of Howard and Lakeshore, or the few homes that appear to be as close as what the applicants are asking for here are oriented to the actual street of frontage and have privacy walls or landscaping creating privacy, whereas the subject property, given its heritage value, is meant to be visible from the street and appears as though it fronts on Lakeshore. One other point with the materials that we're struggling with is the supporting materials from the applicant's consultant and from the Planning Services Department report seem to emphasize the fact that Lakeshore Road East is deemed the front yard, whereas after the lot is created, Lakeshore Road East would be the flankage yard and Park Avenue would be the front yard, and the dwelling would then comply with bylaws. We don't see why this line of reasoning should have much bearing on the current application. Presently, there is a home on the property and that property fronts on Lakeshore. For the consent relating to severance to be provided, the proposed variances need to be approved in a manner that ensures the variances are a minor change from zoning requirements and that maintain the intent and purpose of both the official plan and zoning bylaw, and only then can the severance occur and the frontage change. The fact that the home would be in line with zoning requirements at that point should not be part of the analysis relating to the approval of the proposed variances that are before us now. In our opinion, such a line of reasoning incorrectly makes the proposed variance seem more minor than it is and takes away from a proper analysis on how the proposed variance affects the character of the existing neighborhood. Lastly, there appear to be ways, well, one thing I want to mention, I develop as well. I practice law, my family develops. We are typically pro-development. I'm trying to look at this project in a way that would make sense and that would allow the neighbors to do what they want. And in my eyes, there appears to be a way to keep the setback at least 9.51 meters, which is in line with the remaining streetscape, and still make the project work. Using the applicant's own drawings and dimensions, this would lead to a reduction in frontage of the back lot to just under 18 meters. And it could presumably be accommodated by a minor variance, either relating to lot frontage or side lot setbacks between the 2 homes. Alternately, the garage of the new home can be incorporated into the home design on a smaller lot. In our opinion, this would allow the applicants to move ahead with the project and would be done in a manner that would be more in line with the intent and purpose of the official plans and zoning bylaw than the current submission. It is not for us to decide if this maintains and protects the existing character of the neighborhood, but I think it would be a step in a more appropriate direction. And the more minimum front yard setback that is required, the more compatible the home would be with the setbacks and separation distances of the surrounding neighborhood. There was a picture I wanted to show. I just emailed them to Yasmina because I did not realize they had to be submitted in advance. But if I can just hold one up, one thing I'd like to show, this is the applicant's own drawing. And the red line represents the front of our home next door, and the green line represents the front of the applicant's covered porch, which is about 2 meters in front of our home. zoning presently would allow for 1 meter of less setback than that. As you can see from the applicant's diagram, if this variance is approved, the entire existing home is being moved into a space that is that is in front of our home, meaning it fills our entire setback with the entire home, and a little bit of the addition would be in line with our home. I fail to see how this is a minor variance or minor in nature from the zoning requirements. I know there's been a lot of highlight on it just being a temporary setback, which will then change to a side yard. But I mean, the whole point is, by having a changing dynamic in the neighborhood, that setback should be approved on its own merits, which obviously, if it is, then it makes sense to give the consent for the severance. And, you know, whether it's a side or a front, it really doesn't matter at that point. But the fact that it's temporary just doesn't seem to make sense to us.
No, Jasmina, do we have anyone else that's waiting to ask for questions of Mr. Demchek?
No, Madam Chair, there is not anybody else that wants to speak.
Okay, so it appears that Mr. McDonald and Mr. Tominzik are both concerned with the setback and the front yard whole situation. I'll leave that in your capable hands, Mr. Demchek.
Thank you. So in terms of the lot frontage, obviously from a zoning bylaw perspective, the lot frontage is defined as the shorter of two frontages on a given corner lot, typically. That includes the case before the committee this evening. So when the new lots are created, both respective frontages will now be reoriented towards Park Avenue. In terms of corner lots within the immediate neighborhood context, I did have a look at this, obviously, as part of the planning analysis and leading up to the committee meeting this evening. So this configuration is actually a fairly common configuration in this part of Oakville, specifically for corner lots on the south side of Lakeshore Road that have frontage or adjacent to on a flankage yard to Lakeshore Road. And I'll just maybe highlight a few of them just for example. So on the southeast corner of Raymar and Lakeshore Road, there's a corner lot with a detached dwelling with a flankage yard of approximately 2.75 meters. I will know that this flankage yard is post a road widening, so it includes a road widening on that corner lot. There's the southwest corner, so right across the street from my client's property at Park and Lakeshore, which has a setback from Lakeshore Road of 6.6 meters. There's the southeast corner of Howard and Lakeshore of 5.9 meters. And then finally, the southeast corner of Chartwell and Lakeshore Road of 4.2 meters in terms of the setback. That final lot as well also has a small road lining that was taken from that lot. You can see, and I'm trying to articulate, obviously, this is again, a relatively common condition that's found within the immediate neighborhood. But obviously I can appreciate that the streetscape is changing based on obviously a new dwelling being created, and obviously one new lot, sorry, being created along Park Avenue, which changes the orientation of the existing property. From a heritage perspective, again, my clients hired a heritage consultant. We've been in front of the Heritage Committee as recently as November of 2022. And we've received obviously pretty positive feedback at a high level. And again, I'm not the heritage consultant, but at a high level, I think it was well received that this dwelling was actually being located and relocated closer to Lakeshore Road. It provides it with a bit more of a prominent experience in terms of its streetscape and impact, which was well received by the committee. I will note as well, we are also required to enter into a heritage easement agreement with the town and provide quite significant financial securities to the town for that relocation exercise. Finally, there was again a comment just related to the driveway access. Just in terms of its location, I would like to highlight again this driveway access has been located as far south as possible on the proposed part 2. It does not impact any town trees. The new driveway access, and is well over 15 meters from the intersection, and again meets the provisions of the zoning bylaw in terms of its location.
Okay, committee members, do you have any questions of Mr. Demchak? Go ahead, Mr. Talowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Demchuk, in your presentation, you spoke to consideration being given to a consistent streetscape along Park. But why don't you feel you need to give that kind of consideration to the consistent streetscape along Lakeshore?
So thank you for the question, through you, Madam Chair. So from my perspective, this is obviously a corner lot. And again, this corner lot condition is found fairly commonly within the neighborhood, and including along the Lakeshore Road frontage for other corner lots. Again, right across the street along Park on the other side is a similar condition along Lakeshore Road in terms of its setback. Similar to the southeast corner of Howard and Lakeshore, as well as the southeast corner of Chartwell and Lakeshore. There was a lot of consideration obviously given to the proportions, the massing of not only the addition to heritage dwelling, but also the new dwelling. So respectfully, I would submit that my clients obviously work quite intently with the town to try to mesh as well as possible with that streetscape. I would further note there's quite a range of frontages, quite a range of front yard setbacks of dwellings along Lakeshore Road. So the neighbor pointed out that his property is over 22 meters approximately in terms of his front yard setback, whereas the neighbor right to the east of that is just over 9 meters, I believe. And then on the north side of Lakeshore Road, right across the street from my client's property, the zoning changes. It's an RL1 suffix zone. There's obviously a significant range of setbacks that are not necessarily consistent, but it does obviously make up a variety of character of built forms and setbacks within the neighborhood.
So other than there being other conditions like this in the neighborhood, I mean, you're essentially creating, by reorienting the lots from north-south to east-west, you're creating a full rear yard condition into the front yard of the neighboring property. Can you explain to me how that's appropriate?
So obviously this neighborhood specifically is I would characterize as an estate neighborhood within Oakville. There's quite large lots within this neighborhood, and this orientation of and condition of rear yard conditions that that flank onto, I'll call it the both frontage that you pointed out, but also side yard conditions of some of these very large interior lots that are adjacent to Lakeshore Road are as well quite common within the neighborhood.
Madam Chair, one last question, if I may. Mr. Demchuk, I think the neighbor makes a fairly compelling argument that you could reduce the new lot to 18 meters, still comply with the bylaw, and greatly improve the condition that's the concern to the neighborhood. Have you looked at that?
So
I think the notion was you could make the new lot on Park 18 meters. The retained lot would be bigger and allow you to have a 3 meter greater front yard setback. That would the neighbors seem to imply may not be happy with, but maybe far more accepting of.
So from my perspective, the proposed lot frontage and just in terms of orientation, so the lots are intended to obviously be relatively uniform in terms of their respective widths. And when we looked at originally designing this proposal and designing the built form, when you take off that corner, it obviously slightly reduces the look of the frontage along Park Avenue. But in terms of their overall width, like I'll call it towards the center of the property, they're almost identical in terms of their proposed lot widths. I think was the intent, rather than having a varied, I'll call it lot frontage for each respective lot, just to provide a bit more consistency in terms of the fabric. That was obviously the client's intent for doing so.
Thank you.
Very well. Any other questions or items of clarification?
Am I able to ask a question, or is my time done? If it's done, it's okay. I don't mean to be
I mean, according to our bylaws, yes, but I'll allow it very quickly.
Okay, it's just a question for Mr. Demchak. He speaks of these corner lot conditions and, you know, how certain things are common, but I'm looking at something that could easily be looked at that end, but I'm looking at a picture of, you know, the southwest corner of Park and Lakeshore, or the southeast corner of Howard and Lakeshore, two of the homes that were discussed. These are existing homes that are oriented onto the streets that are not Lakeshore. They were built that way. They're not severed or created recently. This is the subject property that looks like it faces Lakeshore. I just want to know, when you say, you know, sorry if I'm misquoting you, but, you know, this is common with corner lots. I don't see what you're referring to. I mean, we have older homes on corners that are facing inwards and were designed that way with smaller flankage yards. And at Raymar, your measurement of, thank you for pointing out the 2.5 or 2.75 meters is from the road widening, because Raymar itself actually still has the old stone gates of Raymar that are up. And I don't know where the road widening goes to, but if you look at it, it's definitely far more than 6.5 meters from the sidewalk to wherever the side fences are on those properties. So I would just like you to point out, when you say this is common with corner lots, I don't think it is. I don't know what you're referring to in that way.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Demchak.
Through you, Madam Chair. So in terms of those, my comment about it being common on corner lots, so that this, I would suggest again before the committee, the setbacks that are proposed, is specifically the flankage setback, and the numbers that I previously provided is a common condition. I'm not aware if some of those properties were or were not created through a consent application, but they are obviously a lot condition that is found and a setback that is found within the immediate neighborhood. And I would suggest that's quite consistent with what is before the committee this evening in terms of its corner lot orientation and that flankage side yard setback. Thank you.
I actually have a question of planning.
Hello, Madam Chairman.
Hi. Hello, Mr. McConnell. I have a question with respect to planning's comments for this application. Were you constricted by what heritage perspective was on this application, or were some of these points taken into consideration when looking at it? Specifically, all the other corners like Raymar Road and Lakeshore, Park and Lakeshore, Howard and Lakeshore, Chartwell and Lakeshore that were mentioned, as well as the possibility of the front yards being different on those two lots that are being conveyed.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, planning staff did look at it. more holistically and not strictly from a heritage perspective or any preliminary input that may have been provided by the Heritage Committee. So we did look at it from a fulsome, wholesome perspective as per the criteria under the official plan 1119 that speaks to the general characteristics of the general area. So yes, we did look at the area in totality, and it's in the evaluation of the merits of this consent.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions of Mr. Demchak planning before we take the matter into committee? Okay, I see none. We'll take the matter into committee now. Who would like to move a motion, and we'll start the discussion going. Go ahead, Mr. Talowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm compelled or convinced by the arguments of the residents on this case. And I'm gonna start with the variance, but then work backwards, because I think the severance allows the opportunity, for a variance that's doesn't meet the intent of the zoning bylaw. The intent of the zoning bylaw for the front yard is that the streetscape, the existing streetscape, be maintained by having the setback based on where existing dwellings are. What this application does is that it circumvents the intent of the zoning bylaw in this regard by reorienting the lots to a east-west perspective and changing the front yard to a flankage yard. And if the severance is permitted, as it allows that to happen, and I don't believe that meets the intent of the zoning bylaw, and it's a technical interpretation of the zoning bylaw that allows this to happen. And while I appreciate Mr. Demchak gave a very good technical explanation of the zoning bylaw, I didn't hear any rationale as to why this is appropriate use for these lands. And I don't believe enough consideration was given. There's an opportunity, as the neighbor indicated, to lessen the impact of this by making the severed lot smaller, making the retained lot bigger, and lessening the impact of taking a house and basically putting it fully in front of the house beside it. I just can't find this to be appropriate, Madam Chair. I think more care, I'm not saying this land couldn't be severed, but I think more care has to go into it. So I'm going to move that this be denied.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Talowski. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? Go ahead, Mr. Hardcastle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep my comments fairly short, as Mr. Talowski has, as usual, concisely laid out a compelling argument. I very much align in with what Mr. Talowski has said with respect to this, and I will be supporting the motion.
Very well. Okay. All those in support of this application being denied? Okay. And the application has been denied, none opposed.
Through Madam Chair,
Yes.
you need to, actually, it has to be moved first, consent, and then motion for minor variance too.
Okay. So,
Yes, that was my motion on the consent.
okay.
Madam Chair, for the reasons that I've given, I do not believe that the minor variances applied for meet the intent of the zoning bylaw, and I would recommend that the application be denied. And I would note,
And this will be CV's A210 of 2022.
and I would note the significant objection letters and the presentations from the community.
Very well. All those in support of a denial for variance application CAV A of 210 of 2022. Okay, the application has been denied. Thank you, Mr. Demchek. Application CAV A of 211 of 2022. Again, that's CAV 211 of 2022 at 1092 Melvin Avenue. We have one letter of support from a Ruta Oliver and one letter of opposition from a Vic Naik. Good evening, Mr. Giordano.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Peter Giordano, David Small Designs, 1405 Cornwall Road in Oakville.
Go ahead. Do you have a presentation that, yes, town staff is putting it up?
I do, thank you. Sheets 1 to 7 of my presentation are basically graphics that show the 3D elevations, assist you in understanding the design and its context in the neighborhood. But if we can start all the way, if you can advance to slide number 8, please. Perfect, right there, thank you. So we're here today requesting your consideration on 3 variance items. Slide 8 shows you the summary of the 3 items, RFA, coverage, and building height. I can answer any questions you might have regarding items 1 and 2, but for the sake of expediency, and since we acknowledge the staff report expresses no concerns with our 3 items, I'm going to jump directly to the next slide, slide number 9, that deals with the neighbors' concerns with building height. So the topography of our lot from the street to the front wall of our proposed dwelling results in an average grade to finish floor differential of 3 foot 8.5 inches. This is the primary factor resulting in the need for a height variance. For comparison purposes, the neighbor's home immediately to the left of ours did not require a variance for its height as it was built recently, while our home is only approximately 4 inches taller in its built form. It will be. To mitigate the impact of height, the French Chateau style architecture features a dropped soffit line on the second floor with camber top dormers, resulting in a soffit height that in its built form will be lower than the home to the left. The attached garage has a lower roof that appears to be only a single story with living space behind the sloping roof. We believe the roof design provides a nice proportion of roof versus wall. Next slide, please. Slide number 10 shows street view for context. Newer structures, 1098 and 1086 already take advantage of the updated zoning bylaws regarding height. Slide number 11, please. This shows the house, the homes directly across the street, 1093 and 1085, also designed with taller massing. We believe our designs will fit in nicely with the changing character of the neighborhood. So we had the letter of support from our neighbor at 1098, the home that's immediately to the left of us. Mr. Mayak at 1093, immediately across the road, he's the home that you could see, the taller home with the brown roof in this photograph, had concerns with height. So in response to this, our client met with Mr. Mayak and had a pleasant conversation with him explaining the variance challenges. He appeared to be happy with our meeting and the explanation, but I'll leave that up to him if he's here to explain further. We understand that the staff reports from all the departments are in support of our application. So in conclusion, we believe our variance application to be minor in nature and appropriate, passing the 4 tests of Section 45 of the Planning Act. Thank you for your time. We'll be pleased to answer any questions at this time.
Mr. Giordano, just for the benefit of the public, would you be kind enough to go through the first few slides showing the elevations of
Absolutely.
the house? Thank you.
Absolutely. So if we can advance to slide number 4 then, please.
Yeah.
No, that's
That's-
wrong.
Rendering.
No, that was the previous application. Slide 4, please. So that's the front elevation of our home in a 3D view. As I had mentioned, it's sort of a typical ground floor 10-foot, second floor 9-foot ceiling condition, but to mitigate height, the soffit is dropped approximately 24 inches lower than the ceiling on the second floor, resulting in the camber top dormer type style, but that's consistent with the French chateau that we were targeting. Next slide, please. So you can see that we've made an effort with this is the right side that shows a part of the garage addition, or not addition, but the right side of the house, which is the garage with the extension above the garage. So again, streetscape from the front is attempting to lower the overall height. The height of the soffit is still 2 feet lower all the way around. Next slide, please. Presentation from the rear of the property. We believe that the style still massing wise is well articulated and attempts to mitigate the overall height of the building. Next slide. This side is the soffit. Again, there aren't any dormer projections on this side. Hopefully, again, there's a relationship with the soffit that does attempt to make the house look shorter. Do you need any other information, Madam Chair?
No, that's it. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Are there any members of the public that have sought to speak to this application? Madam Secretary Treasurer?
I don't see anybody who wants to speak to the application. But if you can
Very
just
well.
repeat that anybody who wants to speak, they can raise their hand.
Anyone seeking to speak to application CAV A211 of 2022 at 1092 Melvin Avenue, please raise your hand before we take the matter into committee. In the meantime, does Mr. Talowski or Mr. Hardcastle have any questions of Mr. Giordano? Okay, I see none. If no one has raised their hand, we'll take the matter into committee.
I don't see anybody.
Very well. Go ahead. Who would like to move a motion? Go ahead, Mr. Hardcastle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having undertaken my site visit, having reviewed the materials, including the written staff report, and having heard the presentation from the agent for the owner, I am satisfied that the requested variances conform to the 4 tests of the Act. Accordingly, I will put forward a motion of approval, having determined that the significant efforts have been undertaken through the architectural design in order to reduce the perceived height massing of the building. The approval should be subject to standard conditions, those being that the dwelling be constructed in general accordance with the submitted site plan dated November 14th, 2022, and elevation drawings dated July 18th, 2022. And that the approval will expire within 2 years of the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued. I would note that there were no members of the public present. However, there were 2 letters received, one in support, one in opposition, and that provided in opposition has been addressed by the agent.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Is there discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay, the application has been approved, none opposed.
Terrific. Have a good evening.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Application CAV A213 of 2022 for 2526, 2530, and 2538 Spears Road and 549 Bronte Road. If anyone is interested to speak to this application, please call 905-815-6095. Staff will be standing by to take your call and provide you with further instructions to join the video conferencing. Good evening, Mr. McKay.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is David McKay. I'm a registered professional planner with MHBC. With me tonight is a number of my project team members. If we need to get into any details, I didn't see any comments from the public as part of this proposal, so I will try to be brief. If you can go to the next slide. These are industrial lands located on Spears Road. There are three existing buildings that are industrial buildings that have been built, and one commercial building facing Bronte Road. Those are remaining in place. So what we're dealing with is two new buildings located in kind of the brownish area that's shown on the site plan or on this air photo. Next slide. And that's building A and building B. And so the variance tonight is for a permission to increase the height of the building within 23 meters of the residential lots that face that are to the south for a portion of these buildings. And if we can quickly move to the next couple of slides, you can see in this area, this is the landscape plan, that there's a fairly heavily treed buffer that exists today. All but two trees in this area will remain in place, and we're adding approximately 8 new trees to supplement some of the gaps in the cover there. So there is a fairly good existing landscaped area, and it will be better as part of this development. If we go to the next slide, you can see that it is a fairly straightforward industrial building. This is the longer north-south oriented building, and you can see on the left-hand side of the screen where we drop down to a one-story component. And if we can keep going through the slides, you can see next slide. This is building B, a similar base. And if we go to the next slide, which is the rear facing those residential, you can see for both of the buildings that there are no windows. There are some entrances required for the functionality of those units for building B, but fairly limited activity back there. And if we can go to the next slide, this is just as I said, the variance. So we're going from 5 meters to 6.96 meters from the established grade. Now the established grade in this case is about 0.5 meter lower than the finished floor elevation of the buildings. And that's because of the way the topography of the site is and how the established grade is measured at the midpoints of both streets. So the average of Bronte as well as the average on Spears. If we go to the next slide. So you can see that the finished floor elevation is about 100.15 meters. But the established grade, which is actually slightly below the grade that's proposed by about 0.5, 0.8 of a meter, is actually making the variance slightly larger. It is only for that one-story component, as we show, and it's really to allow for proper floor-to-ceiling heights for an industrial building to exist. In our opinion, and the rest of the slides, I do have some various points that I won't go through unless the committee would like me to. But in our opinion, we believe this is minor in nature. It achieves the intent of the official plan for economic activity on the property. It'll allow for a functioning industrial units to occur with no impact on the adjacent neighborhood, given the distance from these buildings to that south property line, approximately 15.5 meters, as well as the substantial existing and proposed landscape planting that is going to occur along that south property line. So with that, I'm open to any questions that committee may have. and would request approval of the variances as presented. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chalowski and Mr. Hardcastle. Any questions? All right, we'll take the matter into committee if no one has called in for this application. Madam Secretary Treasurer?
There is no phone calls.
Okay, very well. Go ahead, Mr. Chalowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I move that this application be approved as applied for, finding that it meets the 4 tests of the Planning Act. Madam Chair, the drawings don't appear to do this justice. When you're standing on site, you really get the impact of the buffering that exists there. And I don't believe that the additional 2 meters to the top of the building is going to have any impact on those residential units. I would also note that there was no objection to this application by the community. So I'd make the approval subject to the building being built in general accordance with the final approved site plans, the satisfaction of the Director of Planning, and that the approval expires within 2 years if the building permit hasn't been issued.
Very well. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? See none. All those in support? Okay, the application has been approved. None opposed. Thank you,
Thank you
Mr.
very
McCoy.
much. Have a good night.
Good night. Application CAV A214 of 2022 at 603 Stevenson Crescent. Again, it's CAV 214 at 603 Stevens Crescent. If there's anyone who'd like to speak to this application, please call 905-815-6095 and staff will be standing by to take your call and provide you with further instructions to join the video conferencing. Mr. Coroza, go ahead.
Okay. Hello, good evening, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Mark Coroza from Chair and Design here at 11 Bronte Road, Unit 31. And I'm the authorized agent on behalf of the property owners at 603 Stevens Crescent. We're looking to seek relief on only one zoning bylaw, and that is the maximum allowable RFA residential floor area. So here in slide 1, so basically the maximum RFA allows for 40%, and our proposal is for an RFA of 42%, which is only an overage of about 17.27 square meters. On slide 1 here, basically the RFA is a combination of areas that combine to attain the client's wish list for the servery area, the servery and pantry combination, and the floor area required for an elevator. If you can please flip to slide 2. And in addition to the rooms on the first floor, the client would like to have a separate laundry room on the second floor as opposed to having it in the mudroom. And we're anticipating a requirement for a second mechanical room. So essentially the combination of these areas are the reasons for the overage of the RFA. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Very well. Are there any questions of Mr. Coroza at this time? I see none. Madam Secretary Treasurer, if there's no one that has called in for this application, we'll take the matter into committee.
There is no phone calls at this time.
Okay, very well. Who would like to move a motion? Mr. Hardcastle, go ahead, sir.
Madam Chair, having undertaken my site visit, having reviewed the materials, including the written staff report, and having heard the presentation from the agent, I am satisfied that the requested variance conforms to the 4 tests of the Act. I'll put forward a motion of approval subject to conditions. Those being that the dwelling be constructed in general accordance with the submitted site plan dated November 15th, 2022, and the elevation drawings dated November 15th, 2022. And the approval expires within 2 years of the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued for proposed construction. I would note that there were no members of the public present with respect to this, and no letters received.
Very well, thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Is there discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay, the application has been approved, none opposed. Thank you, Mr. Croza. Good night.
Have a good night. Thank you.
Application CAV 215 at 2022 at 279 Westwood Drive. Again, it's CAVA 215 of 2022 at 279 Westwood Drive. Mr. Kozak, go ahead. Good evening.
Good evening. Hello, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Richard Kosak from New Age Design at 2601 Matheson Boulevard East in Mississauga. I'm the agent for the owners at 279 Westwood Drive. And today we're looking for a minor variance of front yard setback. The required front yard setback is 24.22 meters. And our proposed setback is 21.36, difference of 2.86 meters. The lot is a sort of a reverse pie. So our front yard is the lower portion on the screen there, which is being used as a side yard. That would be our legal front yard. So that's the dimensions we're looking at from that small curve at the bottom of the lot going upward to the home. And the variance for the front yard setback is just for a portion of that building projection on that side. It will be used as a side yard in our case. Available for questions if you have any.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Kozak. Are there any questions or items of clarification at this time? Okay, I see none. Has anyone called in for this application, Madam Secretary Treasurer?
There is no phone calls at this time.
Okay, very well. We'll take the matter into committee. Who would like to move a motion? Mr. Talowski, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'll move that this application be approved as applied for, finding that it meets 4 tests of the Planning Act. So we have got another front yard variance, but in this case, the application is still providing a significant front yard, very much consistent with what exists today. I do not believe this will cause an impact. And I would note that there's no objections from the community. I would make that approval subject to the dwelling being constructed in general accordance with the submitted site plan dated November 24th, 2022, and elevation drawings of the same date, or sorry, November 22nd, 2022, and that the approval expires 2 years from the approval if a building permit is not issued.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Talowski. Is there a discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay, the application has been approved, none opposed. Thank you and good evening.
See you. Thank you. Good night.
Application CAV 216 of 2022 at 1385 Duncan Road. Again, it's CAV 216 of 2022 at 1385 Duncan Road. Who is the agent for this application? If you're interested in speaking to this application, please call 905-815-6095. Staff will be standing by to take your call and provide you with further instructions to join the video conference. I will note that we do have a letter of objection from a Ms. Diana Piquet and 5 letters of support from adjacent neighbors, Lloyd Anderson, Mr. Robert Clark Toes, and Mr. Kiran Kapoor, and Ms. Patty Kim. Good evening.
Good evening, the committee. My name is Albert Yerushalmi. I'm from Eden Engineering and Design, and I'm the agent for the owners of the property at 1385 Duncan Road. I am seeking relief for one sole variance for the floor ratio. It's regarding the construction of second floor on the existing garage ceiling, and we have worked with the planning department to avoid any massing. We have pushed the floor all the way to the back, and is one sole variance, and we're backing out to the conservation area. We have received a building permit from the Halton region as well, and I'm ready to answer any questions if there are.
Very well, thank you, Mr. Shalimi. Any questions at this time? Seeing none, Madam Secretary Treasurer, has anyone called in or raised their hand for this application at CAV 216-2022 at 1385 Duncan Road?
There is no phone calls at this time.
Okay, since there are no phone calls where we can take the matter into committee, who would like to move a motion? Mr. Hardcastle, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Having undertaken my site visit and reviewed the materials, including the staff report, and having heard the presentation from the applicant, I am satisfied that the requested variance conforms to the 4 tests of the Planning Act. And I will put forward a motion of approval subject to conditions, those being that the addition be constructed in general accordance with the submitted site plan and elevation drawings dated that would be August 22, 2022, and that the approval will expire within 2 years of the date of the decision if a permit has not been issued. I would note that there were numerous letters received with respect to this matter.
Is there a discussion on this recommendation? Okay, I see none. All those in support? Okay, the application has been approved, none opposed.
Thank you very much.
Have a good evening.
You too.
We have application CAV 217 of 2022 at 247 Tweedsdale Crescent. Again, it's CAV 217 of 2022 at 247 Tweedsdale Crescent. Good evening, Ms. Maziva, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name, for the record, my name is Stephanie Matviva, planner with Glenn Schnarr & Associates. The address would be 10 Kingsbridge Garden Circle in Mississauga. I'm the registered agent for the owner. If I could have the next slide, please. So the application before us tonight is for the property municipally known as 247 Tweedsdale Crescent. It is on the east side of Tweedsdale Crescent as outlined in red on screen. If I could have the next slide, please. The property itself is located within an established neighborhood. The owner is seeking permission to demolish the existing dwelling and construct a new 2-story replacement dwelling. This triggers 3 variances. In particular, a reduced minimum from the north interior side yard of 1.83 meters, an increased maximum residential floor area ratio of 38.97%, and as well as an increased lot coverage. If I could have the next slide, please. The proposed dwelling has been situated in generally the same position as the existing dwelling on the property. This was done to maintain the existing character of the established neighborhood, as well as comply to the greatest extent possible with the applicable livable Oakville official plan policies, as well as the livable by design urban design guidelines. If I could have the next slide, please. the home itself features undulations along the front facade. This front elevation does not do it justice. I'll go to this in a moment. But the proposal does include step backs above the ground floor to visually reduce the perceived massing and scale of the dwelling. If I could have the next slide, please. This is the rear elevation. So there is also quite a large rear covered deck that also steps back above the ground floor. If I could have the next slide, please. So on this elevation, you can see the step back above the ground floor. Just like to highlight that sorry, if I could have the next slide, please. So the front elevation in the proposed dwelling has been designed to maintain the general character of the established neighborhood. The proposed front elevation that features a front covered porch and the step backs above the ground level is consistent with some of the dwellings along Tweedsdale Crescent. So I would draw your attention to the image on the top right and the image on the bottom left. The image on the top right is at 228 Tweedsdale Crescent. So it is on the other side of the street, just a little bit further south of the property. The image on the bottom left is from 229 Tweedsdale Crescent. It has a very similar architectural design to what is being proposed. This property is on the same side of Tweedsdale Crescent as the property before us tonight, and is also just a few doors down. Just a few other things to highlight. So overall, it's our opinion that the proposal has been planned and designed to be compatible and respect the evolving character of the surrounding neighborhood. I'd also highlight that of the requested lot coverage, this variance includes areas that are attributed to the front covered porch, the rear covered deck, as well as a basement walkout area. So collectively, these three areas account for approximately 5.3% or 56.9 square meters of the requested lot coverage. Lastly, as outlined in Appendix A of the submission letter, we undertook an analysis of the surrounding areas. So the requested lot coverage is consistent with the pattern of existing building coverages within the surrounding area. And if I could have the next slide, please. It is also consistent with a previous Committee of Adjustment decision that saw an approval for lot coverage of 31.52% for 1239 Sedgwick Crescent. I apologize if I mispronounced the name there. So overall, as outlined in the submission letter that was provided in support of this application, it is my opinion that the proposal is consistent with the policies of the Livable Oakville Official Plan and does satisfy the four tests of the Planning Act. I'm happy to answer any questions that there may be.
Any questions or items of clarification on Ms. Medveda at this time? Go ahead, Mr. Tulowski.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You obviously don't have staff support. Would you like to speak to the rationale that staff are giving as to why they're not supporting your variances?
Sure, thank you. So through you, Madam Chair, we have tried to have conversations. Now, it is no one's fault, but there have been some staff turnover. So we did actually try and contact planning staff to get to a position of mutually agreeable support. So I do note that this application had previously appeared to the committee in October of 2022. Following that committee decision and subsequent conversations with planning staff, amendments were made. So that included the setbacks above the ground level. I understand that there are still concerns with the proposal. In our opinion, we have done our very best to demonstrate and comply with the applicable policies.
In the 4 pictures you put on the screen, 3 out of the 4 of them brought the roof line down below the top of the second floor. And yet your submission was that the design of your proposal was consistent, similar to those, which I'm having difficulty with, given that, and I suspect staff is as well, that your proposal is for full 2-story height, larger than the bylaw permits it to be.
Through you, Madam Chair, their efforts were made to reduce the visual impact of that. So bringing up the visual examples that I had there. The home at 229 Tweedsdale Crescent, so that is the one on the same side of Tweedsdale Crescent, approximately 4 properties to the south of this lot. It had a very similar design feature. So for all intents and purposes, it also reads as 2-story walls. It has that front porch feature that is central. There's, so there are setbacks above the ground level on either side of the front porch. So this is where it's our opinion that it is consistent and is similar. It's obviously not an apple for apple comparison. That would not be fair. Not every house will be the same.
I recognize that you eliminated your structural height variance and you did decrease the residential floor area somewhat, but you're still building to the maximum lot coverage, if not more, right?
Yes.
Why haven't you made an effort to decrease that a little to satisfy the idea of excess massing?
It's a calculated decision. So the home has been designed to try and accommodate the desires of the family. So while we have tried to reduce the overall massing through the undulations on the front facade, I understand the concern. Lot coverage is a little bit high. Part of it is attributed again to those 3 aspects that the bylaw requires to be included. And again, it is within range and is consistent with the pattern of lot coverage permissions that have been granted by the committee and existing building coverages within the surrounding area.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions or other items of clarification? Okay, if there's no one that is called to speak to this application, Madam Secretary Treasurer, we'll take the matter into committee.
There are no phone calls at this time.
Very well. We'll take the matter into committee. Mr. Tulowski, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I'm going to agree with staff on this one. I believe the variances collectively represent overbuilding of this property with not sufficient attempt to mask the impact of the variances through the design. I'd also note that typically when we see a side yard variance like this, it's a result of a unique lot feature, not a fully rectangular lot with a variance of to the side yard for the entire size of the property. Again, I believe that represents an attempt of overbuilding. So, Madam Chair, I do not believe that the variances requested meet the intent of the zoning bylaw, nor do I feel that they're appropriate. I would recommend that the application be denied.
Okay. So there discussion on this recommendation? Okay, I see none. All those in support of the application being denied? Okay, all those opposed? Okay, application has been denied, 1 opposed.
Thank you. Have
Have
a
a
good night.
good evening. Application Application CAV 167 of 2022 deferred from October 18th of 2022 at 420 Sumner Avenue. Again, this is application CAV 167 of 2022 deferred from October the 18th at 420 Sumner Avenue. If you'd like to speak to this application, please call 905-815-6095 and staff will be standing by to take your call and provide you with further instructions to join the video conference. Good evening, Mr. Martino.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Terry Martino, Runway's Architect and Associate, and we are the agent for the applicant at Sumner, 420 Sumner. Thank you.
Go ahead, your presentation is up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The proposal is to construct a new two-story dwelling on the existing lot. As a result of the design, we are seeking 4 variances. This matter was deferred from October the 18th, 2022, in an effort to have further discussions with planning. Additional drawings, which I believe has, showing a streetscape analysis of the property, as well as planning justification report I prepared was put in. And through those discussions, planning sort of came around to the idea, at least they're offering no objection, and rather in my conversations, they understand our rationale for the design. In short, the proposal actually reduces the coverage from the existing that is presently on the property. We're seeing 26.8%, and I believe 30.4% for, and it sort of puts that some additional floor area on the second floor, hence the result of variance for the RFA. We believe that we have complied, as stated in the planning justification report, with the guidelines of stable communities through the use of articulated elevations both on Sumner Avenue as well as Watson, recessing garage entrance on Watson, and increasing the area with respect to the open space to the east neighbor. With respect to the neighbors, my clients have spoken to the neighbor to the south, who is in support of the application immediately south. I personally spoke with Mr. John Canham, a former planner, who lived east of the property, and he is in support of our application. I guess the only other thing I would highlight with respect to the reduction of the side yard blanket, on Sumner, only has to deal with the chimney crest reduction, the rest of the house. Short, that's my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions of Mr. Martino at this time? Oh, Mr. Talowski, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, not a question for the applicant, but I just think it's worth mentioning. I commend the applicant's streetscape analysis, likely one of the better ones we've ever seen, and it really helps to put the proposal into perspective. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Mr. Talowski. I actually have a question of planning with respect to lot coverage. I understand Mr. Martino's rationale that the lot coverage was decreased from the original that is existing right now, but once there's a new development and this applicant is seeking for a new construction, shouldn't that revert to what the lot coverage in that area is permitted to hold?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're not incorrect, but at the same time, we do look to what the definable characteristics are in the neighborhood, and that does speak to, in part, to what that character is. So we did take that into account.
Okay, thank you for your clarification. Anything further, Mr. Martino, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps if I could just add to staff's comments there. The proposal will ultimately reduce the coverage on the site. We still have a variance requesting the additional through the analysis that was provided in the planning justification. And I think committee is well aware of this R3 special provision 10 zone, which over the years has created a number of applications and consents, that there are various permissions which have been granted in the neighborhood. And the neighborhood generally consists, I think staff has found that out through of overall coverage of minimally 25%. So in this case, we're asking for, and it is a variance that 20%.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Martino. Are there any other questions or items of clarification? Okay, I see none. Who would like to move a motion if no one else has called in for this application? Go ahead, Mr. Hardcastle.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Likewise to Mr. Tolowski's comments, I found the streetscape drawings to be particularly compelling, and in terms of the motion I'll put forward here, I believe that they were compelling in demonstrating how this fits in with how the proposed variances and resultant building will fit in with the character of the area. So I'll be putting forward a motion of approval. I am satisfied that the requested variances conform to the 4 tests of the Act, and the motion would be subject to 2 conditions, those being that the dwelling be constructed in general accordance with the submitted site plan dated. Sorry, I'm going off of our sheet here. Just bear with me for a moment. I need to reference back. There seems to be an error with the condition as written. It looks like it's in accordance with the site plan dated July 28th, 2022, and the elevation drawings dated July 28th, 2022, and that the approval will expire within 2 years of the date of the decision if a building permit has not been issued. There were no members of the public present with respect to this matter.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Hardcastle. Is there discussion on this recommendation? I see none. All those in support? Okay, the chair abstains and the application has been approved.
Thank you, members. Madam Chair, members of the committee. Have a great evening.
Good night. Application CAV 173 has been deferred. We have minutes from December the 13th to confirm. Mr. Hardcastle, thank you for confirming those minutes, and motion to adjourn. Mr. Hardcastle, thank you. We are adjourned at 8:38 p.m.